Good afternoon and good morning, everyone, and welcome to Thrive, a monthly webinar series brought to you by ArcPoint Labs, your single source employer solutions provider, helping business leaders create compliant, safe, and healthy workplaces that thrive. Today's topic, staying ahead of driver risk, FMCSA expectations, compliance, and continuous monitoring. My name is Ryan West, your host and Thrive specialist, and pleased to share the virtual floor today with Kendra Cimino at Informed Data. Before Kendra takes the virtual stage, a few brief and important announcements. First, Points Thrive webinars, unless otherwise announced, are held the third Thursday of every month from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 10 to 11 a.m. Pacific. They are free to attend, accredited for credentialed HR professionals through HRCI and SHRM, and are timely, practical information and guidance on a variety of topics, all anchored in ArcPoint's suite of employer solutions. Today's topic is grounded in ArcPoint's background check solutions. Next month, for September, which some of you may know as National Recovery Month, we're excited to kick off a two-part mini-series that dives into recovery-friendly workplaces, featuring experts Dr. John Nareen and Cheryl Brown Merriweather. This mini-series is anchored broadly in ArcPoint's drug-free workplace solutions, which includes drug and alcohol policy review and development, supervisory training, all staff substance misuse education, alcohol testing, and our full-service employee assistance program called Wellbeing Solutions. So if you'd like to learn more about the many benefits of a recovery-friendly workplace, what it is, and how you as a business leader can effectively implement and manage a recovery-friendly workplace program, you definitely do not want to miss this two-part series. Registration for the September and October webinars is now live, and you can register right now for both by clicking on the links in the chat. Second, once today's webinar concludes, there will be a brief and anonymous survey asking for your feedback. Many of you have heard me say many times, your feedback is important, and it is. It measures more than just participant satisfaction. Your feedback directly influences the Thrive topics and speakers that we select and deliver. There's a specific topic you'd like to learn more about, or a specific speaker that you think is well suited for this Thrive series, let us know, and we will absolutely consider it. And lastly, the frequently asked questions. To save time, we're posting the FAQs in the chat, but I do want to emphasize an important point. If you would like a certificate of attendance emailed to you, make sure you're not only registered and logged into Thrive webinars under your name and your preferred email, but that you also attend the entirety of each webinar from start to finish. Okay, any questions, let me know. Please go to the chat to review the FAQs and to also say hello. Let our speaker know where you're logging in from, or perhaps also your company and your current title and or role at your company. If you have questions for our presenter, please use the Q&A function and use the chat for everything else. There's always questions on these Thrive webinars, and we don't want to miss them. So please use the Q&A function if you have a question, and use the chat for everything else. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Kendra Cimino. Kendra is Vice President of Sales at Informed Data, where she helps organizations use risk intelligence and people data to make informed decisions across insurance, transportation, and other regulated industries. With over a decade of experience in sales leadership, partnerships, and risk data solutions, she has worked closely with insurers, brokers, carriers, and enterprise organizations to address emerging risks and improve compliance, safety, and operational performance. Prior to Informed Data, Kendra held leadership roles at Indeed and Samba Safety, helping drive growth in transportation and insurance-focused solutions. She brings a practical perspective on driver risk, continuous monitoring, regulatory compliance, and the evolving challenges facing fleets in today's complex transportation environment. So glad to have her with us today, Kendra. Welcome to Thrive. Thank you for being here. The floor is yours.
All right, thanks, Ryan. I think maybe I might have officially worked through my technical issues, but I'm going to ask for a pulse check here because I'm going to put this thing on here and then I will introduce myself as well. Does that work?
Looks good on my end.
Oh my goodness, we finally got there. Thank you. Well, I'm really excited to chat with everyone today, and thanks for starting to put in your locations. I saw Boston there. I'm going to be referencing my chief product officer who's from Boston multiple times. So if you see a lot of personality, that's where it's coming from. But as Ryan alluded to, my name is Kendra Smino. I'm the VP of Sales at Informed Data. I'm currently based in Los Angeles. I've been with Informed Data for 2 years, but really my main focus over the last 7 years has been around driver safety, risk mitigation, insurance underwriting, all things that I think will be relevant for today's discussion. So primarily looking at ways people can solve challenging problems using people data. A little bit about Informed Data before I jump in why I'm here. Informed Data is a leading provider of verified people data to background screeners. So if you've ever done a background screening in your life, which I'm assuming everyone has, you've most likely interacted with our data in some capacity. We run 60 million records per year, so we learn a lot about the US population. And I'll share some of that cool info and data with you all today. Um, in addition, over the last couple of years, my main focus was getting our risk monitoring solution to life, which really solves a lot of the unique challenges and gaps in some of the hiring methods today, and we'll go through that a little bit today. But the main focus is discuss the gaps that we're seeing in hiring, why it's important, and methods that employers are taking to try to close some of those gaps. So if that sounds good, Ryan, I'm just going to jump right in.
Sounds great. Please do.
Slides turned. Everything's good. Okay.
Looks great.
Great. So, um, jumping in, really three pillars I want to focus on today. Promise you this will not be a sales pitch. We're going to actually spend a lot of time learning some of these gaps. You may have already seen them in your hiring methods, and this is more of a reflection, good discussion. I'd love to get that feedback. But what we're going to talk about is what hidden risk actually looks like in driving behavior. MBR has always been the golden standard, whether we like them or not. Anyone that reviews them for a living definitely does not like them. They're kind of a pain. But what we're learning is that a point in time document has a lot of gaps and holes in that as well that we'll chat through. There's a whole journey that happens before something becomes what I call a documented risk, right? And we'll go through what that journey actually looks like. And then I get asked this a lot, but it's just like, hey, what's going on with the FMCSA? For a while, I was posting like notoriously all the time on what the FMCSA was doing. Are there changes? You're reading about a lot of audits. You're seeing vehicles getting pulled out of service. And the question's always been, were the rules really changing or are they just being heavily enforced? So we'll kind of talk through ways in which where the FMCSA is starting to crack down. A lot of these things aren't really new, but we are seeing a lot of new enforcement. And then lastly, we'll talk about what continuous visibility can look like and whether that's using something like what we have or where you can fill in some gaps today if you're only looking at some things in the hiring process once, and then not again. So that's the goal for today. Okay. We're going to start on the NVR. It's a topic that comes up a lot. It's our first stop. And what we know is we federally need them. They're required for DOT drivers. If you don't have a DOT driver and you have a commercial driver, usually, or a non-DOT driver, I guess, usually insurance is still going to require that you take a look at that every year, or if not, they're going to, and you're going to get surprised. But they're expensive. They're a pain to look through. And that piece of paper is going to quickly tell you if a driver should be on the road or not, but it expires the next day. And it's a pretty expensive ordeal, right? It's about 13 bucks a pop. And that's going to give you what you need to stay compliant. But we're not here to only talk about compliance today. We're going to be talking about how to get ahead of compliance, but also to reduce risk overall. So it's not just the MVR, it's all of these different elements that we all have to deal with in part of the hiring process, right? An MVR is just one step in a background screening. We all know we can't make a single hiring decision on any of these things alone. There's a bunch of other avenues we need to take before deciding if someone's hireable or not, and none of them give you a clear yes or no. So it's all of these equations of things that we have probably different solutions for, different data providers for, but we are hitting on all of this. And the reason for it is everything solves for its own things. So when we look at all these different areas that I just showed, some are dependent on local and state courts, which gets even trickier because now we're dealing with the government. And they're not all equal and they're not all perfect. We'll be talking about some of the gaps today, but MVR we know is solid in getting the conviction in the state that you live in. It's that documented risk. We have to do it. Maybe there's some lag time from the court. We'll chat through that. I mean, we've all sat in line in the DMV. They're not known to be fast, right? Some court to the DMV may have some kind of lag time. The rest, not its wheelhouse, right? We just have to use an MVR to figure out whether or not someone has any documented risk in the state that they live in or surrounding states. And here are some areas in which we tackle. We all know what clearinghouse and PSP does. They're going to solve the problems in their lane, which is crash inspection or drug and alcohol. And then here we are, right? Like, hey, we do all the right things in our hiring process. We're doing the background check. We're looking at the MVR. We're looking at the court data, criminal data. we're doing what's right, but why are there still gaps? And you can see here that there's always like this kind of half moon I have, which is conditional because every town and state acts differently. And what you have to rely on with the driver is that they're giving you all the information up front. And one of the big things that we're going to chat about today is all the states and towns and counties that they've lived in, right? So when you do a court search, that court search is local to that court. If that driver were to live in that driver were to have my living history of 10 places in 10 years and leave one out, you may miss something, right? So there's a lot of this, hey, we're partially covering some of these things when we're doing the due diligence because there's a lot of loopholes and a lot of reporting changes. So I can go through and we'll chat through like, hey, what that looks like when a driver moves, or what that looks like if a driver is driving interstate and you don't have visibility into some of the background that's really important to decision making. Monitoring plugs in ongoing visibility to each of these to ensure that anything that may have been missed can fill in the blanks. We'll talk through some of the things that we're seeing in our own data, driver loopholes, what they may purposely want to get missed, and then some, obviously, they may not even know about on their own. So here, and this is relevant because I'm going to circle back into this again. The numbers aren't low. So it looks like older information, but the FMCSA really posts this type of data every couple of years. This one came out next year, and then probably in 2027, we'll get 2025 and we'll catch up, right? But regardless, the trend is showing that these numbers aren't low. And this is what the FMCSA has recorded for a single year of violations across drivers. And these are their top 6. This one's going to come up more than once in our presentation because our data is showing something very similar, but it is a huge lead indicator of risk. So besides outside of compliance, right, we have to worry about these types of things if we have drivers that are consistently not obeying traffic signs. There's some risk that's associated with that. You are most likely like me reading about audits regularly, so you know that there's a lot going on, while also knowing that most employers are doing standard hiring practices. So most of the time there is a background check happening. I would say it's got to be over 90%, but I don't know the data, right? That most people are doing background checks. So why are the numbers so high? And most employers are doing the right thing, and so are most drivers. Some of these things, like this, is most likely an accident. This, most likely an accident. And we'll go through some of that. It requires keeping up to date on your docs. It's required to being compliant if you have to show up in court. So there's a lot of accidents that also happen by drivers that they don't know because they're not checking their mail regularly because they're on the road. So it's not always in a loophole or mean-spirited. It's just, hey, there's some of these things that are falling through the cracks throughout an employee's life cycle. And some of this also leans into the visibility gap. Our customers are using MVR monitoring and found out their driver had a suspended CDL. It didn't get picked up on MVR monitoring. It turned out he had an open container violation with his truck turned off in a rest stop. That's a criminal offense that doesn't show up in an MVR. And it was also in Colorado and the driver lived in Utah. So there's a lot of gaps there that you may not also see. Something like court-based data will pick that up, but MVR data is not going to, and we'll go through it, is not going to always follow the driver where they actually are. Um, and then, so let me move on to here. So how we look at our scoring and driver risk level is severity, frequency, and recency. Most likely how your carriers are going to look at it and your safety policies are usually designed that way. Here are the big ones. So look at these as these four areas that we see commercial driving, losing privileges on the road. When we do our own scoring, that's the equation. So I've been asked, well, if nobody sees this out-of-state violation, why does it really matter? And it really matters because it's very predictive of the next violation, right? If it's a serious risk indicator that can prevent future claims drastically. So if we take a look here, you can see the different violations that or the different types. And some of this is going to be really obvious, right? We've all kind of been through this, no matter how good you are at managing your drivers. There's probably something that went out of service or some kind of traffic violation that you had to remove them out of the vehicle. But these are the four major areas that we're looking at that commercial drivers can actually lose their privileges. On here. Okay, so I've been leaning into this quite a bit, but I do want to talk about it because this is what our data is showing all the time as far as one of the gaps that happen in hiring, which is the interstate reporting. So let me take a look. I got this data yesterday and wanted to make sure that I got this in a slide because I thought it was super compelling. This came from our chief product officer, the fellow Boston person that's on the call, and he pulled this yesterday for me, and he was like, "Oh my God, this person is a hot rodder. They are all over the country doing all sorts of things in a month, and they would have completely passed a background check because." There's a lot of visibility that you would not see here. And let's go through it. So this is real life data. I mean, change the name and date of birth, but this is exactly what happened. The dates are accurate. The citations are accurate. We looked at one of our customers. We looked at their driver and said, okay, they saw four cited violations in 4 different jurisdictions in 40 days. It's got a ring to it. I swear to you, it's real data. And what you'll see is the number one violation that was reported only 3 days apart, very similar to that first slide, right? The failure to obey traffic control device, which the FMCSA does not like that one. So that's happened now within 3 days. They have this issue in New York and then all the way down in New Mexico. Then earlier that month, they had one in Washington, and then a couple weeks later, some issues in California. California is their state. If they were to apply for a job, most likely the only thing that's going to happen is show up is this right here, which is not a non-hireable offense, right? If you only had one overweight violation in the last year, it's not great, but you're still a hireable driver. Now, all this context here, that's a bit of a challenge, right? Especially if you're having the same violation a couple of days apart. So if you were to look at this driver, they're not going to give you these addresses as their previous homes because they're clearly not, right? And this most likely happened on the job. So you wouldn't see all these different violations that would have happened from this driver. And the context is really important because really the violation that you would be looking at is the one in California, which is this alone, not the context of what actually happened with this driver which is he racked up these violations over the course of 40 days. And it's a big difference because that's the difference between what looks risky and not risky. So hiring decisions, and the reason for the gap is hiring decisions happen here. This and this are not all the same thing. When you get a citation, it can take significant amount of time, and we'll go through an example that citation becomes a disposition, whether they're found guilty or not guilty, and then even more time until that gets onto the driving record. So you could be doing everything right, looking at these things, but you're missing the context, just like we had in our previous hot rodder, right? there is a there is ability, there is a bunch of different violations that even may be at ticket that you would not be able to see that could become convictions later on. And you can't, right? Innocent until proven guilty, but it also leaves companies up for vulnerabilities. If I'm a driver and I get restricted license privileges with a DUI arrest, all of our data is showing that's the time they're looking for a job. Commercial carriers claims are showing it. I just did one with one of our insurance partners as well, and it demonstrates so clearly that pending major offenses is the time that drivers are looking for a job, which means they are going to pass a background check because they are here and they're not all the way over here. And this is what you're making a hiring decision on. 1 and 2 is going to be invisible at the point of hiring. So there are states like even Texas that are notorious for plea downs. My entire career, I've been asked, do you have a special Texas MVR? I don't. I've never made one, don't know how to. But as we saw before, what happens before the violation post is still very valuable. So even if that person is not found guilty, so they get arrested for a DUI and they were found not guilty, they pled that down to maybe a speed. Sure, you can't make any type of adverse decision off that DUI, but would it be a good idea to maybe offer that type of training to that driver? Probably, yeah. And what we also know is it's very, very important information to have because even if you were to plea down once on a reckless driving and DUI and it gets down to a lower offense, I'll show you later on, it's very predictive of these things happening again, and most likely that driver is not going to get a second shot at it, right? So it's very important that then that driver is getting the coaching and the support that they need to make sure that that second DUI or that second reckless driving doesn't happen, even if it were to be pled down. And for those on this call that are saying, well, Kendra, that's what masking is for. Yes, per FMCSA, masking is illegal. Even if you do plea down, it should show up on SID lists. The driver should present that in an application. Couple of things, and I'll show that, still not perfect, right? We're still dealing with interstate a lot of times, states communicating with each other. But the second piece of that too is if you are working with a non-DOT driver, most likely if I'm a traveling, home health nurse and I got pled down from reckless driving, I'm not going to say, oh, that speed you see was actually a reckless driving first, right? It's not going to happen. That's not the reality we live in. So it is very important still to be able to see what that full holistic view of that driver actually looks like. And to keep in mind, it is the challenge that we're all up against, right? Which is still reporting is not perfect, which means masking can still happen today. And I threw some metrics here. I won't go too far into it because I don't want to bore everyone to death with FMCSA stats. But essentially what you'll see here is just pulling that single report is not gonna cut it and still leaves a ton of visibility gaps across all these areas. If you look at masking, you'll see that just regardless, you're going to need to maintain a verified status, and new litigation is making that clear. So here's some data, and then I'll also share over here, just like even though a final conviction should be reported in solutions like SIDLIS, they aren't always. And you can kind of see the trajectory of what they go down. And in some cases, they just don't get reported at all. So here are some recent stats that I pulled. This one's from 2026 of, hey, here are the violations, the masking violations that weren't reported. So even if you did use a solution like a SIDless, where you wanted to see what the original violation looked like, you most likely would, and in these types of scenarios, you could potentially have missed what the original violation is. So I mean, here's the kicker. I don't have an answer to all this. I have an answer to some of it. We do know across the board, a point in time look of a driver leaves a lot of vulnerabilities. Informed data being a leading provider of verifiable people data, we know how important it is for all this to be connected, right down to a person is who they say that they are. So I will go into exactly what that looks like. This is something very similar. If you were to take a look at the trends of the FMCSA, you're going to see, okay, over even more recently, we are seeing some transitions of gaps that they're trying to fill. Most of this, none of this really being super new, right? Just being more heavily enforced. All right, I kind of skipped ahead a little bit talking about the verifiable people data, but I do think it's worth taking a look at, because what I don't want us to walk away with looking at is, okay, I'm doing what I can to hire, but can I trust anything, right? And that's not what I want us to walk away with. When we're taking a look at this, when I said right down to a person is who they say that they are, a lot of that too is not just them making up that they're Donald Duck. A lot of that is really getting the context of understanding where drivers actually lived. Some of that you can get through other sources, but court data is a good way to kind of see if a driver were to have violations in areas that they may not have shared with you. The biggest area that we'll focus on, I guess, for the rest of this is just being able to see changes in behaviors and risk. I looked through countless amount of claims data with customers, both on the insurance side and employer side, and most of the time it is more changes from hiring. So yes, there are gaps in the hiring process, but also things happen in people's lives that make their risk profile change. And the best way to do that is to continue to check, whether that's using monitoring or having some kind of intermittent check. But the worst thing you could do is, especially if you have a non-DOT driver that doesn't fall under the same FMCSA regulations, is to just check one time and never again. When it comes to the claims data, it's so very clear that there's a lot of changes in risk behavior that you wouldn't have seen without some kind of monitoring or checking again. So a lot of this is compliance driven, but it's also safety driven, right? Why we're so adamant about having visibility before it becomes a documented risk, so before a DMV even gets a hold of it, is because the data tells us you have a small window of time until the next one happens. The recidivism rates are very high in these categories, and a lot of these categories are the difference between a medium risk driver to get again to a high risk or unemployable or uninsurable driver. Speeds being the highest, right? One speed, not so big of a deal. Two speeds in a year, that's a bigger problem. And if you're the DUI driver that I gave an example of earlier, 6 months may be the length of time it takes for a DUI to even get convicted. And I'll walk us through a roadmap of what that looks like. If you're solely relying on MVRs, it could be 1.5 to 2 years until a DUI becomes visible to you, depending on when that annual check even happens. So let me show you. I see some Q&As coming in. I promise I'll get to it. This is how this typically works. This is the life cycle of like a DUI, for example. So you do your MVR check. That MVR check, that driver may have actually been clean. A couple months later, they get arrested for a DUI. That from there, that DUI gets filed with the court. And then in some cases, and I always want to caveat, because it always depends on the state, but the license could get suspended. Most of the time, gets suspended. From there, there's a lot of case things that happen, right? You're going to court multiple times. Your driver is going to potentially fight that DUI, right? And we're seeing anywhere from like our snapshot was about March to May. Now they're going to fight this or be in court for this DUI. Say in that case that DUI becomes convicted, that can happen May 2024. This is just an example. Okay, your MVR check is that couple weeks later. At the point of that conviction, it may have taken a while for that to be reported onto the MVR, depending on what the state is. So it could take, it could be the next day, right? That's the silly thing about MVRs. You could pull it, and then the next day that DUI shows up, and then you go a whole nother year without seeing that DUI on that driving record. And back to my earlier example, that's exactly what our claims data is showing. That we're working on with carriers and employers is if you are in that situation, it is the easiest loophole to get through. If you're in court, and it doesn't just have to be a DUI, but anything major, because you will not get caught when you go to search for a job. And I don't want to make it sound like all drivers are sneaky, because that's not the case. We love our drivers, but it is something to be aware of, because anything in those, like I showed in those earlier slides, 1, 2, 3, if it's in that 1, 2 bucket of citation and then 2 disposition, there's a lot of things that can happen in between that time that you would not have visibility into, even when you are doing all the right things, right? You're checking those MVRs annually. So I'll give you a little visibility onto what court, like a risk monitoring solution, can do in this type of scenario. How our solution works, and I'll share just like a little bit about it, is that we would get visibility all the way at that arrest. So starting from point 1. The reason why this is important, it gives employers more visibility into what's going on with the driver, and it doesn't always have to be something as severe as a DUI. So we're looking at the severity of a DUI, but a lot of times, and this happened to me, I had my registration suspended in California. I missed the letter in the mail. I didn't pay a toll. They're very aggressive in California. Don't pay a toll, you lose your registration. And I don't consider myself to be shiesty, but in that case, I should not have been driving my vehicle, because I did not check the mail, and I had a revoked registration. That is more common than this scenario, although we were going to go through the scenario together, which is driver didn't check their mail. They didn't know they had to appear to court, and anything non-compliance, they're jammed up, and they're just as upset about it as you are, because now they can't drive, and they have to figure that out. So the reason why I say that is that initial notification, a lot of our customers really appreciate getting notice that someone's court case is coming up, because it's very valuable to the driver. It's a retention tool, right? You're able to see with the driver, hey, Ryan got a speeding ticket, and I see, Ryan, that you need to pay that by this date, or this is your court date. Just make sure you go, right? Because if you don't go, that's the first thing that they want to do, is take your license, which is anything that falls under that compliance bucket. So getting that visibility earlier is not always as scary as, hey, I need to know if this driver is going to be out of service soon, because that DUI might be convicted, and I want to know what's happening in these court cases. More common than not, it's just going to be administrative, like, hey, we see that you have a court date coming up, make sure you go. And if that failure to appear happens, you know they have an issue, most likely with their license. But this is the life cycle, right? Of typically how I shown earlier of those violations. You're going to see an actual ticket or an arrest happen, and multiple things are going to happen before it ends up to the court disposition, and then from the disposition to the DMV. And this gives more visibility into what's actually happening and all these stages so that you can be more equipped to what your risk actually looks like. But also any types of disruptions and not having someone in the vehicle. So regardless, if you're using informed data or anything that you're using, these are the areas in which I like to advise folks to get a good gauge on, do I have gaps? Because that might be a question that a lot of us are asking ourselves right now. Like, do I even have this problem, right? It's an unknown. And data can tell you a lot of things, and piloting programs can tell you a lot of things. In addition to additional data sources giving you more visibility into a gap you didn't know you had. On our side, we typically do a lot of retro analysis with companies. It may be looking at their claims, or if they had issues getting reinsured, like, hey, would a monitoring solution have picked up on some of these things prior? That would have helped me save money or time if someone's not actually driving. Um, they may, they may look for one to see if those risk indicators even warrant a pilot. I have a lot of customers that jump right in. It's very inexpensive. They measure on a whole breadth of these areas. So regardless of what you're looking at, these are the common different types of KPIs that we see customers wanting to measure. Okay, do I have a gap, and does this solve a real problem for me? And you all know what maybe some of those problems are, and everyone might have something different. Did you see something in those violations that would have been valuable and impactful for you to know earlier? So earlier than coming up at renewal or a driver's annual pull. Did something show up out of state that would have caused more challenges for you, or that would have been a great retention tool with your driver, like the one that I showed earlier that could have gotten training much earlier before the next thing happened? Did earlier visibility allow you to intervene sooner and keep your drivers qualified and compliant? That's the biggest thing. If anyone gets anything out of this, I do not enjoy promoting a tool that has someone lose their job. That's not the goal. The goal is to keep these drivers safe and to keep them on the road and compliant. And getting data earlier should allow you to do that, right? You get the ability to intervene before it even gets to a DMV. Some cases you might be able to help a driver plea down, take the classes, pay the ticket, whatever that looks like to keep those drivers compliant. And that may save you money, and maybe that's an area of focus. Did you save money from less empty trucks? Whatever those units of measurement should be, they should be impactful to your business. And there's some folks on here that may say, I just don't want to look at biannual or quarterly MVRs because my eyes are bleeding and it takes 6 weeks out of that time a month, and that's enough for me. Whatever that looks like, that those KPIs should be defined by your business, and you should feel some kind of relief or impact on any type of program you implement, even if it's introducing new data into your company. So I'm going to say it again, not a firing tool. It's complete opposite. Once something hits an MVR, I always like to say that at that point, you have to take action. Sometimes it's just a conversation. Sometimes it's a fireable offense, right? At that point, it's a documented risk. But getting these types of violations earlier allow you to really assess the risk of drivers and act much quicker before you're forced into doing anything, right? You get a heads up And it allows you to provide training, conversation. Maybe someone rides shotgun depending on what their role is for a little bit. Maybe they work in a different role depending on what type of company you're at. But there's a bunch of different ways in which you can get ahead of the risk before it lands on an MVR. I think I'm crushing time. I will end you with this. These are the three major takeaways that I hope you got from this, but I see some Q&As, so I'm also prepared to be challenged. The point in time checks, regardless, we're seeing the acts from the FMCSA. They're saying that they're going to also monitor drivers. It's just not enough. You saw all the data we have, you see all the data the FMCSA has logged. The conclusion isn't all of these people are doing terrible hiring practices, right? They're probably doing the best with the resources that are available to them. There's just some gaps in those reporting, and there's a way in which you can fill those gaps. Interstate driving, some states share reciprocity, some don't. If you live in a state like Massachusetts or Georgia, those states don't tell you anything. So I'll use my chief product officer again. He always likes to talk about his trucking friend, that trucker friend that lives in Massachusetts, but right on the border, he works in New Hampshire. Probably, I like to make a joke, could be a sketchy driver. Who knows? Massachusetts isn't going to share anything that's going on in his driving record with New Hampshire. So, and that's a joke. I mean, I don't really know, but the reality is there's a lot of gaps in those interstate reporting, and some of it is very clear. Like we know there's 5 states that don't share with anyone, even if it is a DUI. So, something to keep aware of. Of course, I would love everyone to walk away and say, Kendra with informed data, her monitoring solution is going to solve this. I want to work with her. Regardless of what you use, some kind of continuous visibility will eliminate the amount of surprises, or at least reduce the amount of surprises that you get when it comes into insurance renewal, when you're doing annual reviews, and will allow you to take more control over not just the hiring, but the retention of your drivers and the safety of your drivers. I mean, pretty good on timing, Ryan.
Yes, amazing, actually. We do have some
Yeah.
questions coming through in the Q&A, which we can
Yes.
only fill the next 10, 15 minutes or so. I only need about 40 minutes to close.
Okay. And that went away for me. And I told you I could handle it. So let me see if I'm lying to you or not. Yes.
While Kendra's solving her tech issues real quick, if you have any questions for our expert, don't let them go unanswered. Please submit them using the Q&A. You can do so using your name or anonymously. And then if you have a moment, please let us know what you thought about today's webinar by completing the post-webinar survey. A link is also now in the chat.
Okay. Got some. Okay, CDL, I think we got a scenario. This is my favorite. CDL employee receives a citation for following too closely after hitting another vehicle while in work hours. Will the citation and conviction be sent to FMCSA, or do I have to report? So if it gets on their motor vehicle record, the FMCSA will have access to it. As far as reporting, you said drug and alcohol test was negative. As far as reporting, I will double check because I definitely hate to be like of legal advice, but most people aren't reporting these violations to the FMCSA themselves. But let me make sure that I do that as a follow-up to the webinar, because I always try to be safe when it comes to the legal side of things. But you should be okay. Second, okay, William. Are MVRs protected for non-CDL drivers? We have been prohibited from checking the MVR for non-CDL in New Jersey. Well, William, I've never heard of that before. Typically, what we see is that your drivers would need a driver release form, but most folks, even in the state of New Jersey, it is best practice to be able to pull motor vehicle records for anyone that's driving on company time. So, William, make sure that you hopefully I'll get my information at the end of this, but let's chat just to make sure that I'm giving you also information that can help you in the future for some of these maybe legal challenges. But you should be able to pull in New Jersey for non-CDL, and it's actually highly encouraged. Okay. We only have about 10 people that have vehicles over 10,001 pounds. They only need a med card, correct? Not CDL, and they don't need to keep logs, correct? Um, I believe so. That is not necessarily my forte, is being able to decide when someone needs a CDL or not. But we have a legal team that we can give a nice summary, Ryan, afterwards, of just like those types of things. I think that that's probably a good like Q&A follow-up.
That's not a problem, Kendra. We can certainly do that. The ARC Point also has a team of resident experts, Lisa Tonioli, who's working diligently behind the scenes, who can get answers to these questions. So what I would encourage, if some of these questions are coming in that doesn't kind of fall under your purview of expertise, we can take it from there. No worries.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, CDL transit operator convicted of a DUI and receive a hardship license. Can they operate transit CDL vehicle? Yeah, you guys are tricking me with a lot of the legal stuff. So I just want to make sure that we give like formal legal advice, and that's not necessarily where, well, it's getting recorded informed data would probably be very upset with me if I start giving legal advice. So let me follow up with you guys on that, and I can work with Lisa on that because we also have that stuff that's a little bit more formal in documentation.
Yeah, what we normally do too is when some of these questions come in that we can't answer real time is you can perhaps partner with Lisa and then
Yep,
we'll answer these in a follow-up, like we'll send out an email and
great.
answer those questions. Yeah, we're happy to do that if you're okay with that, Kendra.
Yeah, I would love that, Lisa. We will
Okay,
definitely chat, make sure that we're giving the right legal guidelines.
sure. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for your questions. If you have any more, feel free to put them in the Q&A so that we can at least address them in our follow-up email. I'd like to thank Kendra for her time today, for providing such helpful and timely information. I especially loved all the images and all the statistical insider info. I love me some stats. Many takeaways. The major one for me as a drug-free workplace program specialist is that employer risk doesn't end once the employee gets through the pre-employment process, right? In much the same way, like a random drug testing is a helpful risk mitigation tool beyond the initial pre-employment process, or ongoing supervisory training is helpful beyond the initial onboarding process. Continuous monitoring gives employers an ongoing way to identify emerging driver violations and thus risk to worker and public safety, and potentially much earlier than an annual NVR review. That's my high level takeaway. But don't go anywhere. Kendra's going to give us her final Thrive words of wisdom in just a moment. Please let Kendra know what you thought about today's webinar by completing the post-webinar survey. A survey link will be in the chat shortly. It will also pop up in a separate window once this webinar concludes, provided you don't have a pop-up blocker installed. Next, as we talked about earlier, registrations for our September and October two-part Thrive webinar series is now open. If you want to learn more about the many benefits of a recovery-friendly workplace, and how you can make your workplace safer while supporting the health and well-being of your workers and also your community, register. You can do so right now for free by clicking on the links forthcoming in the chat. And as always, you're encouraged to reach out directly to your local ArcPoint Labs provider if you have questions about today's topic. But if you also have questions about other ArcPoint solutions, such as respirator fit testing, employee assistance programming, supervisory training, and drug and alcohol testing and policy development, both DOT and non-DOT, check out www.arcpointlabs.com/employer-solutions to learn more about those solutions and many others, or simply click on the link for that webpage, which will soon be in the chat. All right, we've reached the top of the hour, or not quite, but the end of this webinar. It's officially time for Thrive Words of Wisdom. Kendra, key takeaways today. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Ryan, I'm just going to address this one quick question that I saw in the chat, which is how we advise clients on alert fatigue. It's a really good question, so I don't want to let it collect dust. We One thing that we do here is that we will actually score the risk of the alert so that you know to pay attention to the ones that are like medium, high, or high. So the goal isn't to just get a ton of alerts. It's not telematics, right? So the idea is that we would actually score the risk for you to help you prioritize which ones you want to take a look at versus getting a bunch at a time. Just wanted to throw that out there. And then you get to choose which ones you want to track. You might not want to track Ryan's speed, but you may want to track something that's a little bit more severe. So you get to own that process and we will filter accordingly. Okay, key takeaways, and I'm going to keep it kind of short and sweet. The biggest thing that I like to emphasize is that I, I will say this, come from a unique background where I also worked in HR tech. Finding drivers, very difficult, whether it's CDL drivers, non-CDL drivers. There are more jobs available than drivers that are available. So the goal is never to make it harder for these folks to get a job. The biggest thing I would say is take control over this process, fill in the gaps where you can, hold your vendors accountable with the KPIs that you need to measure, and be able to see risk before it becomes a documented risk. Because the second it becomes documented, your choices and your ability and what you're able to do go down quite a bit. So the line that I like to lean on, Ryan, is risk before it becomes a documented risk, own the process, and there's a lot of tools that are able to help you do that, like ours.
Love it. Well, on behalf of the entire ArcPoint team, a very special thank you once again to today's Thrive presenter, Kendra Semino, also to our resident background check expert at ArcPoint Corporate, Lisa Tonioli, working diligently behind the curtains as always, and to everyone attending, our valued partners and loyal members of the ArcPoint network. It's an honor to serve you and to help you create compliant, safe, and healthy workplaces that thrive. We'll see you next month.